Welcome to our explainer. Today, we're diving into one of the earliest and honestly most controversial biological theories of crime out there, the atavistic form. All right, let's just jump right in with a pretty provocative question, one that's kind of fascinated and frankly troubled people for centuries. Can you actually spot a criminal just by their face? This question isn't new at all. Back in the 19th century, one guy claimed he had the answer, for sure. His name was Cesare Lombroso, an Italian criminologist, and he was convinced that, yeah, criminality was literally written all over a person's body. So in 1876, Lombroso drops this really radical theory that completely shakes up the world of criminology. He introduces this idea of the born criminal. He called it the atavistic form, and the core idea? It was that criminals weren't making a choice to be bad. Nope. He argued they were basically a separate, more primitive subspecies of human, biologically destined to commit crimes because they were less evolved. So, according to him, these people were, in essence, evolutionary throwbacks. Think of it like this. Their criminal behavior wasn't some moral failing. It was an innate part of them, something hardwired into their biology. They had, built-in problems with moral reasoning and impulse control. Okay, so what did this born criminal supposedly look like? I mean, Lombroso didn't just have some vague idea. Oh no. He created a super detailed checklist of physical features and even personality traits. He pointed to a whole range of facial features he thought were super common among criminals. We're talking things like a strong, prominent jaw, high cheekbones, really thick eyebrows, and even large ears. And believe me, the checklist did not stop at the face. It went on to include body features, like having really long arms, and even personality stuff, like being impulsive or having no remorse. He tied all of it back to this primitive, savage state. He even thought tattoos were a dead giveaway of this kind of nature. Lombroso went even further and sorted offenders into 3 different categories. His main focus was on the born criminals, obviously, but he did admit that sometimes crime was because of mental illness. And then there was this third group, the criminaloids, who were the largest group. He said they were influenced by their environment, but, and this is key, he still thought they had some kind of underlying biological weakness. Now, Lombroso was totally insistent that his theory wasn't just some idea he cooked up. He claimed it was based on hard, empirical evidence. But let's take a closer look and see how this so-called proof really holds up when you put it under a modern scientific microscope. You have to understand, he presented his work as super scientific for its time. He used this technique called anthropometric measurement, which is just a fancy way of saying he scientifically measured the human body. He went around meticulously recording the physical features and skull shapes of thousands of convicted criminals, both living and dead. So what did he find after all that measuring? Well, he claimed that a whopping 40% of the criminals he looked at had these so-called atavistic markers. Sounds pretty compelling, right? 40%. But yeah, there was a massive problem with this. And here it is, the huge critical flaw in his whole argument. 40% compared to who? Lombroso never bothered to study a non-criminal control group. And without that comparison, that 40% number is completely meaningless. I mean, how do we know those same features aren't just as common in the general non-criminal population? We don't. This right here just shows you the gigantic gap between what he was doing and what we consider real science today. He had no control group, his judgments about who had which features were totally subjective, and he completely ignored huge environmental factors, things like poverty or poor nutrition, which could easily explain some of those physical traits he was seeing. So the big takeaway here is that his whole theory just completely falls apart under any real scrutiny. It's methodologically a mess, it's scientifically baseless, and honestly, it's ethically dangerous. Critics have, quite rightly, pointed out how deeply racist and sexist it is. He was attributing these primitive features to certain ethnic groups and to women in ways that just reinforced all the ugliest prejudices of his time. So you'd think a theory that's been so completely debunked would just, fade away. But the weird thing is, even though it's totally discredited, Lombroso's ideas haven't completely vanished. It's like they've left behind a ghost that's still kind of haunting us.
Okay, now, to be fair, we do have to give him some credit. His work, as flawed as it was a huge deal for its time. It was a real paradigm shift. He was the first person to really push criminology away from these purely moral or religious explanations for why people commit crimes. He argued, hey, we can study this scientifically. And by focusing on observation, even if his methods were crude, he helped turn criminology into a scientific discipline. He really did pave the way for the modern biological and psychological approaches we study today.
But that really dangerous core idea that you can spot a criminal just by how they look, that idea still sticks around in our unconscious biases, and it affects the real world in some pretty powerful ways. I mean, think about this for a second. Modern studies have actually shown that defendants who have features that people perceive as atypical or maybe even unattractive are more likely to be found guilty by juries. And they get harsher sentences too. That is the ghost of Lombroso's theory at work, right in the heart of our justice system, fueling these biases. So, what should you take away from all this? It's not just some quirky, old-timey theory. There's a really serious lesson here. It's a powerful reminder of why modern forensic psychology is so insistent on using evidence-based, complex explanations for behavior, and why it completely rejects these simplistic, appearance-based assumptions. And that kind of leaves us with one last question to chew on. Lombroso's jury is scientifically dead and buried. But what about the biases it fed into? That gut feeling that we can judge a book or, a person by their cover. Are those biases really gone? Or do they still, in some way, influence all of us?